Now to this developing story, Ebrahim Rasool's expulsion as South African ambassador to the United States comes at a time of intense diplomatic tension between Pretoria and Washington, from legal action against Israel to proposals to rename Santon Drive after Leila Khalid. The ANC's foreign policy is under scrutiny. With Rasool back home and no clear replacement in sight, what is South Africa's endgame in international diplomacy under a Trump administration? Brett Herron, Good Party Secretary General, joins me now live. Brett, appreciate your time. Does South Africa have a coherent foreign policy, or are we navigating global diplomacy based on ideological nostalgia?
I think South Africa does have a clear foreign policy. It's an unaligned policy. But I think we are navigating uncharted waters. The geopolitical terrain has changed substantially. And the White House, for example, is not as predictable as it was under previous administration. So there is uncharted waters. But I think if you look at South Africa's foreign policy, it is a stable foreign policy and a coherent one. It's just struggling right now to find a reception, I would say, in the United States.
You call it unaligned, but one of the reasons that South Africa is in hot soup, if you will, is because of its position on Palestine. Its engagement, well, one would argue its engagement at some point with Russia calls it a measure of problems, and it raises the question around what is it that South Africa should do? Does it remain unaligned? Does it pick a side? What does it do in the case of the United States?
Well, South Africa's foreign policy is unaligned, but we are the right nation to be championing a human rights-based approach to global politics. So it is impossible, given our history, to ignore what is happening in Palestine. The Russian bogeyman is no longer really valid, given that Trump himself has a very good relationship with Putin and with Russia, and appears to favor his relationship with Russia over any other former US ally. So I don't think the Russian connection through BRICS and through other relationships, historical relationships, can be the boogeyman that maybe was previously relevant.
Well, I raise it because it is challenging. It almost suggests that one has to sway or be blown by the wind, because a few months ago it was an issue with the existing regime. It's no longer an issue now. But coming back to Ebrahim Rasool, was he a casualty of truth-telling or diplomatic recklessness? Should he have said what he said, if it even was the truth?
No, I think there's two things that can be true at the same time. I think it is important that the South African ambassador to the United States, not only because it's a strategic trading partner, but also because of its powerful position in the world. It is important that whoever is the ambassador has the understanding and the convictions of what South Africa needs to achieve in order to redress our history and to transform our socioeconomic conditions. So it's important that the ambassador to any country, but in particular perhaps to the United States, embodies those values and that understanding. Ebrahim Rasool, Ambassador Rasool, was an experienced ambassador. He was in the United States and in Washington before, and probably would have made a very good ambassador given his experience in the Washington corridors of power. So it was a lapse of judgment, I think, for him to have said the things he did, because by all accounts, in diplomatic circles and international relations organizations, saying what he said was inappropriate for a sitting ambassador representing a country in the country he was criticizing.
Well, Brett, you argue that it was a lapse in judgment. He's landed on South African shores an hour and a half ago and is still singing the same tune. Well, and as far as he has no regrets about having spoken the truth. Meanwhile, the presidency has argued that don't do anything further that might stoke the hornet's nest, if you will.
Well, I say it's a lapse of judgment because while he may hold those views, and those views are not necessarily incorrect, in the capacity as an ambassador, and having been there before and having gone through the training that all ambassadors go through, it is not appropriate for any ambassador in the world really to criticize in the way that he did the country that he was assigned to. That is not to say that what he said is not what he believes, and what many people believe. So I'm not conceding that it wasn't a lack of judgment. It certainly was, even though he held those views, and I think authentically so.
So moving forward, how should the government of national unity recalibrate foreign appointments to balance sovereignty with diplomatic pragmatism? Because that seems to be a challenge.
Well, it's important, as I said earlier, that our ambassador and our sovereignty is not for sale. So the talents or the skills that would be required by anyone who replaces Ambassador Rasool would be, as I said earlier, to understand what South Africa is trying to achieve in order to champion it and also to defend it when necessary, but to do so in a way that doesn't alienate the host country. So it's going to require special skills, someone with the experience, and someone who authentically understands what South Africa needs to achieve and why we have policy positions that maybe even bad faith players in South Africa don't accept and travel around the world criticizing. So the person who goes to the United States really does need to understand what South Africa's objectives are in the National Development Plan in terms of our constitution, but needs to be able to manage those relationships without causing the harm that Rasool did cause.
So let's touch a little bit on trade. I know you mentioned that area a little bit earlier, but what are the implications of Trump's trade policies and hostilities towards South Africa on economic cooperation and AGOA? I mean, just how much can South Africa still do to save whatever's left of trade and I suppose any benefits that they may be getting from those relations with the United States?
Well, if you look at how Trump has imposed tariffs or threatened tariffs and started what people are calling trade wars with their closest allies. I mean, Canada, their neighbor and one of the United States' closest allies. Whether AGOA would have survived or will survive is a big question that I think we should all honestly look at. And it may have nothing to do with South Africa's policies, Trump's apparent feelings towards South Africa, or the information that he's getting on South Africa, which is often disinformation. The question really arises, would AGOA have survived, and will AGOA survive, regardless of what South Africa does, given that Trump seems to be inclined to impose tariffs and to overturn and disrupt trade relations, even with those with whom he can have no real beef. So, I mean, he's done it to Canada, and he's imposed tariffs on Europe, and he tried with Mexico but backed down. So it's volatile, and I think we must be cautious about AGOA and whether it will survive regardless of what we do.
Final thoughts, Brett. Let's touch a little bit on BRICS. President Trump, when he went into office, threatened various countries that wanted to disregard or not use the United States dollar. Now, regardless of what position you take, it seems that every nation just about is under some form of attack from the United States. And as far as trade is concerned, does this situation now encourage greater cooperation between the BRICS countries? Should they put greater focus on building trade amongst themselves?
Absolutely, and I think the signs were there right from the beginning, almost maybe Trump's first day in office, when he started adopting almost an isolationist approach to trade and to how the United States will position itself. I think the writing was on the wall, and the opportunities to look for other markets for countries like South Africa was an obvious thing that we had to do. And the BRICS Plus now are not small economies, and So South Africa should be looking to strengthen trade relations with other countries, including the BRICS plus countries. And we've recently had a delegation from the EU, and there's a delegation that's currently in Japan. So I'm assuming that we are exploring other markets and other trading relationships, and BRICS plus becomes maybe more important as the United States become less reliable.
Good part. He's Herron, Secretary General. Good speaking to you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.